nursery, all that fun stuff. So I got this table up here, and we're talking about the table. I know it's Palm Sunday, and you want to hear about Jesus riding in on the donkey, because you've never heard it since last year at this time, but I went a little bit different direction because Jesus did do that, and but he had to go somewhere afterwards, and he lounged and hung out with friends. The table today, we have the communion table, which also seems to has our offering on it to God, so that's God. But and then we have our regular table. Actually, it was going to be cool and put like a cross in the middle or whatever, but that's not really the table I'm talking about. Everybody, big things happen around the table, believe it or not. And the table of God, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit, is a pretty big deal. And we're all invited to the table, and to be honest with you, that's hard to make sense that we would be invited with what we've done. But it's hard to make sense that what they've done, that they would be invited as well. And we do a great job of who we think should be invited to God's table. But at the same time, he has it open. And to be honest with you, I thought about it. This week alone, I sat at 8 different tables with different people. Different tables. And that's honestly where some of the truest ministry I've seen happen, was this week at different tables. Now, I'm not saying it's not great the way you come and you sit out here and that we should all be at tables. If you want the table experience, get up a little early next week, 6:30, we're going to have tables set up because we're going to eat right afterwards. So we're going to have a table type setting. But honestly, when someone's sitting on the other side of a table, it relaxes the mood a lot. You here, this is an audience style. It kind of reminds me of, if there's a community board meeting, you also have this same type style. And it's definitely, there can be some friction in the room like this. But all of a sudden when you get tables involved, and I've seen many ministries do this, you get tables involved and things relax a little bit. Now, I know some of you don't like the idea of having tables in a place like this, different things, but at some time, it relaxes the atmosphere. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to tell you, one of my favorite ministries is a funeral meal. Why? Because people are going through the hardest times of their lives. They just lost a loved one. They just said goodbye for the last time to a physical body. And then they get to go, and what's next? I think churches do a great job of having funeral meals because it gives them the sense of this is all going to work out when you get around a table. And sharing food is a big deal. God gave us 10,000 taste buds in our mouth for a good reason, right? To enjoy the food that he gave us. But he says, listen, I have given this time to you. So today we're going to cover a couple points. That the table that we come to with Christ, first, is a really good thing. It's great that you've been invited, and it's there to really enhance your life, to bless it. Second of all, it really breaks the things that has been going on in your life. I've heard things around a table this week that really broke people because, honestly, it's hard to have a conversation in here that gets deep because there's so many of you and different things. But around a table, things that break down. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But what the table overall does, it connects you with other people. It connects you with other people that God has blessed you with. So I put a nice flower, thank you for whoever brought all the pretty flowers today. I put it right in the center of the table because really I wanted it to look normal. This table is not special by any means. But when you sit down with someone else and you really care what's going on in their life, the big table becomes more special. And the 8 tables I sat behind, Jesus was brought up at every table. And there was also food. So Jesus and food, you got me. I love it. So if you really want to know, where's your heart in ministry? It's behind the table. I love to eat. And in the future, I really do want to have more pitch-ins. And I think that's important that we do more tables. If you're on that committee and you don't think that's a great idea, that's okay. We'll have pizza or something. But we need to do more at the table talk. And to be honest with you, we do a great job when we get together. And we bring it all together. The service today, really, to be honest with you, this quote I heard last week. And it says, when you have more than you need, build a longer table, not a higher fence. I don't even care if you listen to any other word I say today. If you take this quote, you write it down, and you take it home, and pray about what this means to you, that's where I want you to get today, is when people are different, and I know, we had a business meeting the other day where different things were said. It's okay to be different, right? But don't build a higher fence because you're different. Build a longer table and sit down and talk about it. Again, it's hard in an audience type setting, but when you get to a place where you sit down, invite other people that are not like you to sit down at your table, because that's where things happen. I've seen many tables make an impact in my life. I'm going to share a few, and you may think, this is crazy. Was this really what impacted your life so much? Yes. Funeral meals I've already covered, right? My parents, I told them I'd actually say nice things about them today if they came. And sometimes it doesn't happen that way. But growing up, I was one of those people that loved other people, so much so that I would invite friends over, not just on the weekends. They would come literally every day of the week to play cards and really eat my mom's food. And I'm telling you, their grocery bill, now that I look back, had to be ridiculous to feed a bunch of teenage boys. But every day that table was open. And to be honest with you, we didn't have a big cross in the middle of our table, or we didn't always have the Bible open. But today, these people can go to my mom and dad, and they trust them because their table was always open. Matter of fact, if you need to literally, at your kitchen table or dining room table, sit an extra spot to remind you every time, man, it'd be nice to share this table with other people. Do it. Set out the extra spot. You never know who's going to come. I got invited this week somewhere that they weren't expecting me, but they set an extra spot anyways, and it makes a huge impact, right? And I'm okay with that. But people see the long-term impact. I know many people have came up to me, well, your parents were always so, they're like a second mom to me or second dad. And I'm like, they didn't do anything that special besides welcome people, whoever I brought in the door. I brought some crazy people into that door. But you also have to be willing to give a little bit. We had an indoor hot tub at one point in life, which sounds really cool. Until you get a large kid that your son invites, does a cannonball in the middle of the hot tub, splatters the walls. Again, there's times where they were invited to the table, but they also got a talking to as well about some things we don't do. And it's okay. But is your table open for others that are different than you? Something that's been on my heart lately is, how diverse is our table at home? Do we invite others that are not like us? Maybe we've never invited. And I'm thankful to say that's one of our big staples that me and my wife work on, is to get different people at our table. Many that are very different than us. Because I pray that God uses that. And I believe He does when we're hospitable to others. When we went to Africa, the owners of the foundation, or they started it, now they have 16,000 kids in their schools, but the owners let us stay at their house, and they were normal. They ate with us at supper, which is odd in an organization today of that extreme, that they would eat with us at supper. But those little huts that were not near as big as half this stage, every place had a table, and they expected community. They had chairs, a table, and then they had their little beds in the corner. Every single hut we went into had a place where community could come. It's a big deal to have people come to the table, and they welcomed us, and it was huge for us. At the Potter's house, a few of the guys are here today. The thing that we have in there, honestly, there isn't very cool decor and different things, but in the center piece, they have a big table that would fit like 10, 12 people, and it has a cross in the middle, but the table is where I've seen much ministry happen. The table is what sets it apart. They can come to church, we can invite, we can go out to church, but when you go to the table, that's where some things, I've seen real church happen this week, deeper than I've ever seen, because you give some stuff up at the table, and I'm thankful for that. You all have your own tables. Honestly, this is just a cheap fold-up table with a nicer cloth in the back. It doesn't matter what your tables look like, as long as they're inviting. Are you inviting people to your table to see the love of God? And to be honest with you, food can go along with that well, but it doesn't have to be. But is every person that you encounter, do they feel like they would be invited to your table? Or do they feel like, well, I'm not like them, there's no way that could happen? Well, Jesus kind of wrecked some tables. He disturbed them, to be honest with you. He went to the Pharisees' house. He went to the biggest sinner's house. He went to wherever he was invited to join them at the table, right? And I would think today that he would want us to invite him, first of all, in our own lives. Don't invite people to your table if you just think they're different and you're going to change them. Invite people to your table because they're different and you want to love them. You want to show them what Jesus really looks like. Because that table should not only bless you, it should bless other people that are there. And then when it breaks you, I know when Jesus was lounging at the table, at one point with his disciples, there's this lady that came in, and she had this really expensive jar of perfume. This is really odd to me, and it should be odd to you as well. She comes in and takes this year's worth of wages worth of perfume and dumps it on Jesus' head. You talk about sitting at your table and weird things happening, that would be one of those points where like, what in the world is going on? Things that happen at your table sometimes you may not expect, but Jesus can do amazing things. Have your mind open what could happen. Matter of fact, everybody thought this woman was crazy except for Jesus, right? And he said, this is something you'll always remember. It's going to be written in scriptures that you'll always remember. She prepared and she didn't care who was at the table. She was going to go love on Jesus. So, the table could break you as well. Things happened at the table. Jesus called his disciples out at times, but he invited people. Think about for a minute, when we have this Holy Communion that you're able to take part of, think about the people that were at Jesus' table at the Last Supper, right? You see this big portrait, and I don't have on the screen, but Judas was at that table, who was just sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, right? And what does Jesus do? He welcomes him at his table, and he still loves on him until the very end, when he knew he couldn't. He knew he had to go do what he needed to do. But here's who I want to think about is Peter. Peter was an awesome guy, and he had a big mouth, to be honest with you. He was quick at talking and slow at following through. But what Peter did, it's not necessarily around a table, but it was around a fire. And in those days, they cooked things over fire a lot more. Obviously, they didn't have the stoves that plugged into the wall, so they did it over the fire. These people were keeping it warm. But listen to Peter's denial of Jesus. And this was someone who was at Jesus' table and really became a martyr for him. In John chapter 18, 15 through 18, it says, Simon Peter followed Jesus, as did another of the disciples. This is when Jesus was taken away. That other disciple was acquainted with the high priest, so he was allowed to enter the high priest's courtyard with Jesus. But Peter had to stay outside the gate. And I can imagine Peter's ego was struggling here a little bit. Well, the other disciple got to go in, but like, what about the other 10 that didn't even come at all, right? Peter had to stay outside the gate. Then the disciple who knew the high priest spoke to the woman watching at the gate, and then she let Peter in. So he ended up getting to come in, and the woman asked Peter, "You're not one of that man's disciples, are you?" Straight up about Jesus. No, he said, "I am not." Obviously, that's a point in Peter's life that he'll end up regretting for a long time. Denying Jesus straight up. Nope, I don't know him. We have that choice all the time. And he was just at the table with Jesus. For 3 years, he sat at Jesus' table. Jesus loved him anyways. Even though, just right then, he denied him. And he ended up denying him 2 more times. But verse 18 says, because it was cold outside, the household servants and the guards had made a charcoal fire. And they stood around it warming themselves. And Peter stood with them, warming himself too. So in this scene, Jesus is he's under the guard, and he's about to be sentenced to death. And you have Peter outside around the fire saying, "No, I don't know him," scared to death of what could happen. But he's around this fire. And the fire I've never seen as that important of a part, right? Until I've seen the rest of the story. Look at John chapter 21. And we're going to go ahead and read 1 through 17. It says, later Jesus appeared. This is the last chapter of John, and you're like, why'd you throw this in here? Because it doesn't even go with the rest of the chapters very much. But it says, later Jesus appeared, this is after he died, rose again to the disciples besides the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. So this is an exciting time. This is exactly how it happened. They were out there fishing. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, Thomas nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. And Simon Peter was sitting around with those guys, and Jesus was gone. Where's he at? What's going on? He says, well, I'm going fishing. Right? I'm doing something I know how to do, because I don't understand the rest of this world. I'm going fishing. Of course, they're like, we'll all come too, they said. So they all went out into the boat, but they caught nothing all night. So I'm just going to ask, what is your attitude like if you haven't caught fish all night long? Maybe they were going fishing just to ease their mind, so it didn't matter if they caught any fish or not. But this is why I don't fish, because I never catch any fish. And fishing is not fun when you don't catch anything. Dude, I don't know what I'm doing as well. But they said, we'll come too. They went out in the boat, and they caught nothing. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. And he called out, hey fellas, have you caught any fish? Some versions read children. He even calls them children. You caught any fish? I'm sure, like, how do you take that? All it says in this version is no. No, they replied. I can imagine there was some different tones that were used there and different things they were thinking. And then Jesus says, throw out your net on the right side of the boat and you'll get some. And I want you to know, in those days, there's sometimes where people could actually see the fish from shore better than you could in the boat. Sometimes you need that farther off perspective. But they listened to him. That's what always amazed me by that. But when they did, they threw out the net and they listened, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, hey, it's the Lord. He's over there, right? And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped it for work, jumped into the water, and headed to shore. This guy was excited. The same guy that just denied Jesus not too long ago next to the fire 3 times, right? He hears it's Jesus, and he's ready. He takes and he jumps in to the water. And actually it said this is many, many feet away. It wasn't like from here to the back of the wall. This was possibly 100 meters away, because they couldn't tell who Jesus was at that time, and a lot of scholars say it was quite a ways away. But the others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to shore, for they were only, well, there you go, about 100 yards away from shore. 100 yards. That's a good ways to swim, just for the record. I don't know how many laps in the pool that is back and forth. You swimmers can tell me later. But when they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them. Fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. I have never thought of this before, but how did Jesus bring them back to him when he came back? Through some breakfast. Through some fish being cooked over, what? A fire. So Peter denied Jesus in front of a fire. Now he jumps out of a boat, swims 100 yards, can't wait to get to Jesus. Right? And I think about this is sometimes we mess up, I'll be honest with you. We all do, and we're in situations where it looks a little bleak and you're like, I cannot believe I said that, or I cannot believe I did that. Well, guess what? Jesus always gives you a way, because you're still breathing. You have a chance today to come back to him, even maybe in the exact same spot you messed up. And he says, listen, I'm right here for you. So Peter has this chance, and he goes, he jumps in, and what does he find waiting for him? It's kind of the setup Jesus had. Hey, come and have breakfast with me. I've cooked it and I've prepared for you. Some of you are not breakfast eaters. You don't appreciate this as much as others. But these guys who didn't catch a fish all night, this was exciting, right? It says, bring in some of the fish you just caught, Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to shore. There was 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. Why 153? Here's one of these number things, and I encourage you to go home and look. But a lot of commentators say 153 encompasses all kinds of people of the world. I don't know how they got that, but they were saying basically that represents that every fish that Jesus catches, the different people of the world, they all come together, and Jesus orchestrates everything so perfectly. I'd love to hear your input on the 153 number in the future. And yet the net hadn't torn. He says, now come and have some breakfast, Jesus said. And none of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? For they knew it was the Lord. Again, why in the world are they saying this? This guy just died a few days ago, so you're like, well, they should know it's the Lord. But you see someone who died a few days ago, and he's alive, and he's wanting you to have breakfast with him, there are some questions going on in your head, right? And then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. So not only does he have breakfast ready, he serves them at their makeshift table, maybe just sitting there, but he wants to spend time with them and let them know this is real. A lot of people debate, is just Jesus really real? Is he everything? Well, why in the world do these authors that are inspired by God talk about the visual things? The smells, the taste, the breakfast. Why wouldn't they just say, yeah, they've seen Jesus? No, this all went to verify exactly who Jesus was. To make Easter, which we celebrate next week, even a bigger deal, right? Because they knew it was the Lord. And then Jesus served them bread and fish, and this was the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. So after breakfast, Jesus asked Peter, and this is the part you've all heard before, but, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And I imagine that they're next to the fire here. So Peter messed up and denied Jesus in front of the fire, and Jesus is not only getting him to say that, yeah, I love you, and give him another chance, he even does it next to a fire. Pretty cool point you can think about. I know it really hit me hard. Peter says, you know that I love you. Then feed my lambs, Jesus told him. And Jesus repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said. You know that I love you. Then take care of my sheep, Jesus said. A third time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Then Jesus says, feed my sheep. And this is where, at the table, Peter breaks a little bit and says, I get it now, Lord. You called me back to a fire that I messed up. And you gave me another opportunity. And instead of being ashamed and guilt-ridden, you know what Peter does for the rest of his life? He's on fire for God. He goes and preaches to many. Matter of fact, he was part of the huge church movement, and he helped spread the gospel in amazing ways. And he did something with what he was told. Again, he didn't have across the table from thousands of people, but guess what? When he did sit across the table from people, he made it worthwhile. And he knew that he was invited to the table, even though he denied Jesus, the Son of God. He did it himself after spending 3 years with him because he was scared or whatever reasons. He denied him. But in turn, after being at the breakfast table and saying, God, you are God and I'm not, he was so excited that he spread the gospel the rest of his life. And he was actually crucified on a cross, and he was crucified upside down to not be like his Savior because he wasn't worthy. That's what we get to do when we come to the table of God. He says, I know that you're a mess. You're broken, but this is an exciting thing that you get to come to my table, Jesus' table, right? Where connection and belonging is exactly where we need to go when we're a broken sinner. So I ask you today is, where's the Lord's, are you invited to the Lord's table? Have you accepted the invitation? Because once you're there, great things await. Isaiah, I've never even read these verses that, I've read them but not paid any attention to them. Isaiah chapter 25, verse 6 through 9. It says, in Jerusalem, the Lord of heaven's armies will spread a wonderful feast for all the people of the world. He isn't going to build higher fences so you can't get in. He's going to build a longer table because he wants each and every one he can get to come to his table. It will be a delicious banquet with clear, well-aged wine and choice meat. Basically, all the table we've been to in our past and today that we're going to sit around the table doesn't compare to God's table. And it's a lot more than food, I'm telling you, that he's going to offer. There he will remove, this is what we need, the cloud of gloom, right? Because some of us need to go to God's table just to get the cloud of gloom off of us. I fall short of that a lot. The shadow of death that hangs over the earth. Guess what? Jesus conquered that too. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away all tears. He will remove forever all the insults and the mockery against his land and his people. The Lord has spoken. And in that day, people will proclaim, this is our God. We trusted in him, and he saved us. This is the Lord in whom we trusted. Let us rejoice in the salvation he brings. A lot of times when we come to church, we get hung up on what we can give, what we can get, and all this thing. But can we be honest for a second? Church is our opportunity here on earth to come to the table of the living God and to share with other people who are very different than us the glory of heaven. That he can remove for me. I don't know what he does for you, but for me, he removes the cloud of gloom. He swallows up that death. He wipes away the tears. He He saves me. He's my salvation. That's the table I want to go to. The King James Version of the whole come with me and for breakfast, Jesus says, actually translates, he says, come and dine. I didn't know they used that word too much back then, but it did. Come and dine with me, Jesus says. The Message version says, breakfast is ready. Whatever it is for you at your table, know that the table's open for you. It really is. Like, whatever you've done, it's open for you. And when you've experienced that table, if you've experienced this heavenly table, he wants you to open it up for other people and not get in the way. Maybe set the extra chair. Do what you have to do to show that love and bring to the tables. I've been amazed in my life what the atmosphere will do, but a table is very powerful. I always thought that the most important thing in our house was the TV or the couch or maybe the comfortable bed because I use it every day. But anymore I've realized it's the table. It's a place that you go and you invite others. But before you get there, you prepare your heart. Right? I know I missed out. You're on your knees next to your bed praying. After that, go to the table and invite people to share this feast that God has to offer. We celebrate the feast next week. Someone asked me, well, why don't we really celebrate Good Friday as much as we do Easter? Why do people get off work for Easter and not Good Friday? And I was like, well, I'm kind of a quick responder and I don't think sometimes. But I said, a lot of people die, but only one person's risen. So, Good Friday, in essence, we know he died on the cross, and that's very important. But guess what? The very, very important part that separates Jesus from everybody, and there's proof, is that he's risen from the dead. We get to celebrate that next week. So when you hand out these cards and you do different things, I'm going to ask you, where are you at the table? Jesus, he was the main attraction, obviously. But the last verses I want to share with you come in John chapter 13. Verses 12 through 15. He's at the table and it says, he just washed their feet. When he had washed their feet and taken his garments and he reclined at the table again. So Jesus at the table, he even went the extra mile and did the lowest job of washing their nasty, dirty feet. He reclined at the table again. He said to them, do you know what I've done to you just now? Right? You call me a teacher and Lord, and that's great. We can all do that, call Jesus. Yeah, he's our Lord. And you're right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, wash your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I'm sure at this point at the table, people's eyes were like roaming around and like, that's not what I really signed up for, right? But Jesus says, for I gave you an example that you also should do as I did to you. So Jesus knew who was at his table. He knew there was people that were going to deny him, but he also knew that he had to stick with them and love them anyways. And that in the future, they would invite people to their table and they would change the world through the love and the servanthood of Christ. Again, I know that he ran into the danger because of people at his table. But it's so important to know that if I'm invited to the table, me, after all that I've done, I should be able to invite other people. Not only that, I'm super excited to invite other people. And people that are so different than us. When I think about the feast in heaven, people are like, what are we going to do in heaven? I know one thing. We're going to eat at a big feast. Right? We're going to worship and hear the angels sing, holy, holy, holy. And then we're going to worship God. To be honest with you, it's not going to be about us, and it's not going to be about anybody else there in heaven. It's going to be all about Jesus. And when you experience his love and you came to his table, that's when heaven comes to earth, and it changes things. I want to be at that part of that table here on earth. I want to bring heaven here and say, man, I want to show you what Jesus has to offer. And I'm going to let the Spirit move through me, because in my life, I know I can't do it on my own, but as soon as God takes over and says, let me do this for you, things are going to change. So I want you to pray about, your table as a family. What can you do to expand and make your table longer? Too often we're building higher fences and saying, no, we want to keep these people out. But God says, build a longer table, not a higher fence. This is something I struggle with. I'm just going to be honest with you. I want to be around people that are like me, think like me, look like me. Man, the more I'm around other people and the more I see how diverse it's going to be in heaven, I'm super excited to share in that. So the challenge in your bulletins, accept that invitation. To close the sermon time, we're going to listen to a song and hopefully see a song here. It's called Come to the Table by the Sidewalk Prophets. I want you to think about what this means to you and let it sink in.
We all start on the outside looking in. This is where grace begins. We were hungry, we were thirsty, with nothing left to give, or the shape that we were in. And just when all hope seemed lost, love opened the door for us. He said, come to the table. Come join the sinners who have been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table. Come meet this motley crew of misfits, these liars and these thieves. There's no one unwelcome here. And that sin and shame that you brought with you, you can leave it at the door and let mercy draw you near. So come to the table. Come join the sinners who have been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table. Come to the table. To the thief and to the doubter, to the hero and the coward, to the prisoner and the soldier, to the